January 1895. It's a year of growth, innovation, and unrelenting advancement on all scientific fronts. Many things occurred in this year, such as the invention of the motorboat, although that technically occurred earlier in the 1890s, as well as the growth of several towns, and the adoption of redstone electricity. In this brand new year, a rare astronomical event would be witnessed by the residents of the island nation of Monument Point. A once-in-a-lifetime meteorite was said to have struck near the waters a few miles out. It was visible at night. Residents saw it and were astounded, even curious. Once the event was over, they cataloged it in their news articles and let that be that. However, what was on that meteorite had other plans. The meteorite was carrying a large, ancient group of organisms, parasites, perfectly adapted to whatever world they were from for total domination and infection. They are highly adaptable and come in many shapes and sizes. The Leviathan class organism on it, once on impact, spread its spores, or really I should say microbes, into the waters near Monument Point, and over the course of 3 days, it ended up in the water supply of the more rural west side of Monument Point. Locals didn't notice it at first, but their livestock and as well as fellow farmers started to experience strange symptoms, such as one farmer who had this to say in the early days of the outbreak. I just came over from the east side of Monument Point to help my brother and father tend to their cattle. They was complaining about a strange illness ravaging the west side, turning their livestock into strange and overly aggressive. I went there to see for myself, and upon arriving to their ranch, I've noticed that the cattle there, they are not normal. The skin almost looks pale in a way, and purplish lumps are forming over them in unnatural spots. Once I got close to the pen, they tried to lunge at me, and my brother had to pull me out of the fence. I went over to help my father in the barn with the horses, only to discover him eating a dead horse. He looked at me, and he lunged at me. This wasn't the father I knew. I had to shut him in that barn. It was only then until I realized something was seriously wrong, and I told my brother that we need to get out of here. So yes, that was one of the first-hand accounts of the infection that we know of. Over the past 3 days, that side of the island started getting worse and worse, and inevitably the Monument Point Army had to step in. They sent in relief in the form of doctors and on-field scientists and soldiers, and they tried establishing checkpoints from the east to the west in order to stop people from contracting anything and bringing it to the main city. This ultimately proved futile. And one of the biggest mistakes made was the addition of medical research camps in the main city near the doctor's office. Injured people from the rural regions were brought in, as well as soldiers, and their wounds were tended to, and they were studied. Of course, they took precautions. They were tied up to the cots and beds there, and to ensure nothing gets out of hand, they had soldiers stationed there. But here's where I cover parasite biology and how this ties in. So, what you need to know is that there are two types of parasites. Regular infecteds are infected animals and whatnot, although certain animals are ignored or cannot be infected for unknown reasons, presumed due to the parasite's strict evolution, but it's unknown. And then the second type of parasite are pure parasites. Parasites made out of entirely 100% pure parasitic matter. For instance, there are three methods pure parasites can form. The first method, which is the fastest, is nests that are spawned by other pure parasites. The second most fastest, although it's not that fast, is when an already infected animal, over time, its motor functions from the parasite growing inside of it start decreasing, and eventually the parasite exits the body and leaves it as just a corpse, and it just becomes a pure parasite because it crawls out of its dead body. And then the third method pure parasites can form takes the longest, but in overly infected bodies of water where the microbes are, they can clump together to form pure parasites over time. But that's technically the longest. Now that you know the two parasite types, infected animals and people, once the parasite enters them, it can range from a few minutes to an hour or two, but depending on method of transmission. But once an infected organism gets, the infection, they begin to exhibit high fever and uncontrollable urges, just like spread the plague. Eventually, their organs will fail, and by that time, the parasite will have complete control of their motor functions and brain. And they even have the scary ability to edit the DNA. So they can make the host more resistant to pain and more durable in general, and stronger, which is usually the case. So basically, those people at those medical tents, once they get infected, those chains are not doing anything, and they are breaking out and snapping everyone's necks. So yes, that's how that ties in. So inevitably, the people at the research camps, once the parasites broke free, they were overran, and they caused havoc in the inner city, causing supply lines to be cut from the main city to the rural west side, and just chaos in general. Eventually, though, the west side of the island was also had its own problems, and those soldiers at checkpoints were getting really overran. They couldn't do anything because the parasite was just really adaptable and infectious. And so, over the next couple of weeks, the parasite entered the main city, and most of Monument Points was confined to the northern docks. This is when they sent in a warning to their neighbor country of Centralia, and Centralia received that warning, and they took it seriously. So they were at a war with Sudansk at the time in 1895 over a small area they owned called Spruce Goose Forest. So they decided to send in this warning to Sudansk too, and proposed they quit fighting in order to team up against this new foe that could wreak havoc if not contained. And so Sardonsk read it, and they accepted. And so Sardonsk and Centralia teamed up and sent their forces to the northern docks of Monument Point, where the first confrontation happened. And yeah, so their objective was to evacuate as much people out of Monument Point as possible to their respective territories and fight off the hordes as long as possible, and until their naval ships can pick them up. The fighting proved successful, and they were able to evacuate many people out of the island, and they even blew up bridges connecting the island to the mainland. At the same time, and I really do mean at the same time, Monument Point's western territory of Oriental Colony was being overran as well, if not 10 times worse, due to the fact that since the colony is very small and the wilderness has plenty of animals to infect, parasites managed to get over to that area very quickly and overran it. At that time, the remaining people in the town huddled near the docks for safety in hopes of some sort of rescue, but that rescue never came, and Oriental Colony fell really quickly. Now, the final two major events for the early days of the infection is the parasite invasion of Woodington, which happened not too long after Monument Point officially fell, and Chesil receiving word of the parasite and wrapping up their outlaw wars very quickly and violently, and forcing everyone to build a giant wall around their main town and burning down their smaller settlements. We'll cover the Woodington first. So, the parasites managed to reach Woodington through the ocean currents via their microbes, and they managed to infect the people of Woodington very quickly, since the town is very small. And not a lot of people made it out. So, there was two groups of survivors in the town. One group of survivors were held up at the church up top the town, and they lasted for not a while. They eventually got overran, and most of them died, and they had to run a bit ways east until they reached them at Crotchley Farm and decided to hunker down there for a bit. And that's when a large parasite horde besieged them in the middle of a thunderous night, and they all died. But the other group of survivors, the ones held up at the mayor's town hall, they survived till the end of the apocalypse, actually. And for Chesil, during the 1890s, they were not doing great. They were in the midst of the outlaw wars. A combined group of outlaw gangs formed into massive cartel-esque rebel cells, you could say, and waged just a campaign of terror throughout Chesil, which in turn caused the hastily formed militia of Chesil to also commit said acts of terror against their own people and the outlaws, and with paranoia, corruption, and sadism being the main reasons why the militia were the way they were. So when the El Presidente of Chesil managed to receive the word that infectious monsters had the possibility of taking over the world, he took zero chances, and the regime in Chesil was peaceful at first in the 1880s, but in the 90s during the wars, they grew increasingly authoritarian. So when the apocalypse happened, the authoritarianism cranked up to 100. They forced people to tear down their homes and forced them to construct a giant wall around their town. And they sent out their militia to go burn down other settlements and force the people there to enter the main city of Chesil. And once that wall was complete, which they also had to brutally wrap up the Outlaw Wars, which, let's just say, things weren't pretty. But once that wall was complete, they would never allow any outsiders into their nation, and any outsider near their walls would be shot on sight. In Chesil, things were safe but grim. Night patrols enforced strict curfews. Men in flatbed wagons mounted with kerosene lamps to shine lights on anyone caught outside midnight would either face harsh punishment or be gunned down with a Gatling gun instantly. And young boys were conscripted into the militia at young ages, increasingly young ages, as young as 12. And overall, strict punishments were given to people caught outside the walls without a reason. So, Chesil was not a friendly place during the apocalypse. But anyways, the parasites never really reached Chesil in the entire years that the apocalypse happened, as Chesil was very far up north and had favorable geography. Only a small amount of parasites managed to get into Chesil, but Chesil sent out routine kill squads to exterminate parasites and any foreigners caught in their walls. Not walls. Any foreigners caught outside their walls in their territory. Anyways, moving it back from Chesil to the broader scheme of things. Central City was obviously the next target of the parasites, and I will cover when Central City falls. But that will be that. I will make part 2 whenever I want, and goodbye.